Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are actually at this point. It's my focus to focus on embedding GAMP compliance into digital health software. For those of you that know my name, GAMP is as mouthful as my full name is. It stands for General Automation Manufacturing Protocol. People think it's going to be automation, it's manufacturing, and then we are saying healthcare. So, there's a lot of things to unpack over here. So let me get the ball rolling. For those of you that know me, I'm Sriram Rajagopalan, doctorate in organizational leadership through project management degree, master's in computer engineering, and a bachelorate in electronics and communication. I also went through the same motion of becoming a software developer, design architect, and moved through the whole process. A number of different certifications to my credentials. I haven't listed all of them, and I have trained and taught many different people in different institutions as well. So focus for today's webinar is going to be on general automation manufacturing protocol. And we will connect with some information about computer system assurance, software development lifecycle, project or product lifecycle. It's part of our thought leadership series. And sometimes I introduce a concept using a tool. And today I'm planning to introduce SpiraPlan to demonstrate some of the concept that we are talking here as well, time permitting. I do want to call out a big disclaimer. I'm not like a guru in GAMP. GAMP is a huge framework, and there are a lot of information packed into it. But when I was trying to go and have panelists come and talk, there was always a difficulty in getting the panelists and get them to agree on talking about these things. So in the interest of everyone to know more about how GAMP is important and how that can be applied in the context of whatever we are doing, I had put together this presentation to get everybody lined up strategically. So my goal here is going to be using some information to talk about GAMP, what it is, why it is, and stuff like that, and also connect with SDLC and PLC processes I mentioned, and then CSA, computer system assurance, and move into SpiraPlan over here. So before we even get started, the concept of GAMP primarily came from the notion of drug development. When we look at the drug development lifecycle, we basically come up with how to identify a specific target population for solving a specific disease state. And when you create a new molecule, big or small, you are hitting that particular target and see if you are able to prove that efficacy, that it is targeting the appropriate organ and be able to do the work. And then you try to get into more information about crystallography and stuff like that to develop that particular molecule in a stable, sustainable, and reliable fashion to prove that this molecule is sustainable for continuous research. And then we get into the preclinical trial, testing on lots of animals, and there is going to be a lot of information like where you start, like the rodents, and then go into the primates, and then get into the actual human population. And that's when we move into the clinical trials, where we focus on the first human drug, first human dose, and many other elements come into play, and then move into the actual process of drug approval. And there is drug approval process of various states over here, which I'm not going to go into because that itself takes another webinar. So if I were to consolidate all these things, it comes into three important elements, which is about how do you manage science to be able to do what you are planning to do. And then what are the different stages of discovery of how you go about producing this drug. And then how do you actually produce it in mass scale so that all the reliable properties that you are looking for in the drug is still contained in a controlled fashion as you produce them in mass scale and distribute it to different supply chain vendors and stuff like that. So these are the three important elements of how you consider this. And you need to think from how you are going to deploy into the supply chain environment when you are developing the drug. What's the point in having a drug that you cannot sustain on scale? Right? You need to start thinking about how I'm going to think in terms of how I will deliver this in a large scale to a large scale population while you are developing this drug as well. So there is some thought process of, starting with the end in mind already, in place. And those of you that are from an IT or technology or agile kind of a background can relate to this, because we now are starting to think about DevOps, which is like, you develop in such a way that you are able to operate. So those kind of thinking process exists already as part of the drug development pipeline. So why is GAMP? Why do we need to worry about this? In what way this is helpful, or expanding the thought process here? So when you take a look at this, we need to not forget the lessons we already learned on adverse effects. And what is an adverse effect? An adverse effect is something that you did not intend to see happen, but happened. And you need to actually identify that and be able to actually take proactive actions. And in a risk management world, we talk about CAPA, which is corrective action and preventive action. And this is exactly what we are trying to refer here in terms of something that we did not intend happened. As a result of this, how do we go about and adjust our entire process of product, as well as delivering the actual product to a large population. So back in about 1980s or early part of that time frame, I was reading a book by Arthur Haley. It's a very good book, Strong Medicine. And there he was referring to a major problem called thalidomide, which was a drug that pregnant women used to take for morning sickness. And it was not necessarily completely evaluated and stuff like that. And they were prescribed to the women. And unfortunately, what it did was have an impact on the limbs of the fetus. As a result of that, people were born with fissures, not necessarily, the actual, fully developed arms and legs. And this population is right now weaning away. But that lessons learned cannot be forgotten, because it is these lessons that actually put so much effect on. We cannot have uncontrolled science, and we cannot have an unregulated market. And if you put both these things together, it's going to be a recipe for disaster. And we are dealing with people here. We are dealing with lives of people throughout their life. So it's going to be a very challenging scenario to address. And now let's take a look at this. Ever since this, we have changed a lot. We are now putting a lot of controlled science. There are a lot of standards, regulations, and we are in a regulated market. And so we are controlled a lot, and we are in a lot more regulated market. And still, there is a little bit more additional variable introduced into this equation, which is technology. Now, in 1950s, there was not as much technology as we have today. Now, when you add technology into the mix, there is going to be a lot more additional challenges that we need to take into consideration, which bleeds into both how science is managed, as well as how the regulated markets are, reacting to this. Many times, there are not enough precedents for us to actually work on. So we need to take quality and risk management and a lot more into consideration in everything that we do. So picking on the last 3 stages of the actual drug development that I talked about. If you look at this, there is a preclinical, clinical drug approval, and then a post-drug approval. It's a post-drug approval that the last stage that I have added here, which is taking into the market now has the drug and how are people reacting into it. Now, take a look at the COVID. We have to accelerate the drug discovery, how we are actually addressing the mechanism of action, and provide this to a large population. And are the people showing signs of recovery? building that immunity against the disease and stuff like that. That's a post-approval assessment. Did we do right? Are we doing it correctly? Should we have to take any corrective actions? And things of that nature. That's happening all the time. And when you look at this whole equation, there is a lot of things that we are entering here. Each stage is loaded with a lot of uncertainty. In my simple explanation of risk management, uncertainty means risk. And every one of these ideas are experimentation. When you talk about managed science, you are looking into creating some hypothesis and evaluate whether this particular pathway will actually lead to the results or not. It may prove to be ineffective, or it may prove to be effective, but not necessarily sustainable. So many other elements come up. So your experimentation still needs a measurable objective. So which is again going back to the strategic objectives of how we do this. The next one is there are a lot of cost consideration in every stage. Many times people come and say, oh, we are agile, we are working on this experimentation stage. But, if you actually take 2 weeks of 10 people working for, 80 hours, 80 times 10 is 800 hours. 800 hours has been logged. And did we get the value for this? That thought process has to constantly be involved because unless otherwise you are working in a voluntary in a situation, you are getting paid. And so 800 hours is actually equivalent to some kind of cost. And from a management perspective, this is also to be thought in terms of the opportunity cost of people that should be working on something else rather than on this one. Management, therefore, has to consider what is called an entry criteria and an exit criteria. In other webinars, I talk about a C criteria, which is about success criteria, entry criteria, and exit criteria. So those are the things that we are actually trying to talk about in terms of when is enough, when are we going to enter the next stage, and under what terms and conditions. And different people engage as a result in different times of this whole process. You involve a legal person too early, that person is not going to be happy. You involve the same person too late, that person is not going to be happy. So what kind of stakeholders to be involved at what point in time, that's a huge thing that we talk in the project and product management areas as well. And there are legal and regulatory implications of what we do, how we do, and stuff like that. So many different considerations come into play. And as I mentioned before, computer software has now become so pervasive. There is not a single work today that we are doing without the use of computer software in some shape or form. So it has become so pervasive that anything that we do or don't do that could have an impact is considered a risk, and risks are accelerating, far more than what we originally thought. And so we need to really think about how we react to risk. And this is where, GAMP really comes into play. And a number of different organizations have been, putting together how these things should be working. And I'm sure I'm going to give you a lot of acronyms over here. And so I have built this little, glossary here. So I'm going to bring that out so that, for those of you that want to know what those glossaries mean, I have that right over here. Okay. So when you look at the timeline, much before 1970s, there were a lot of regulations that came up and said, International Standards Organization was formed somewhere around 1944, mid-1940s. And then we introduced what is called the Hazard Analysis and Critical Care Point, HACCP. So we introduced these kind of things in terms of different industries and stuff like that. And later, if you fast forward it a little bit, between 1970s and 1990s, the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineers came up, and we introduced the concept of ISO 9001, which is how quality should be part of everything that we do, with or without software and stuff like that. And we also introduced the International Council of Harmonization, which is going to be the ICH code, like ICH9 and some ICH10 and things like that we are using as to how we code the work that we are trying to do. These things became standardized so that we are able to see how we are working together as a team, managing, identifying, and responding to risks of various nature. And somewhere between 1991 and 2000 time period, you can see that I'm condensing the time frame here a little bit. So you see that, the GAMPs 1, 2, and 3, they both were released. So somewhere around 1995, GAMP 1 was introduced, 96, GAMP 2 was introduced, and in GAMP in 1998/1999, somewhere around that time frame, GAMP 3 was introduced. It was same time around the same period that the 21 CFR Part 820 and Part 11 were both introduced. And 820 focused a lot more on how you manage, you identify, and you respond to various events and triggers that control your work that you are doing. And the Part 11 was much more about, electronic signature, because no longer were people actually sending information by snail mail documents or printed documents and stuff like that. And there was a little bit of an electronic signature approval process that were introduced. And later down the road, this is the time frame where we introduce what is called a computer system validation, what we call CSV. Again, for those of you that are also used to a number of different acronyms, I'm not talking about comma separated, values. It's about, computer system validation. And what that meant is large organizations like Center for Drug Evaluation Research, devices and radiological health, and biologics evaluation and research, these organizations started using the CSVs processes in their process of delivering products, services, and results. And around the same time frame, we introduced the ISO 14971, the early stages of that, how these standards apply in the medical devices. And somewhere around this time frame, the medical devices were physical medical devices, a blood glucose monitor, thermometer, and, many other things were, physical devices that were applicable in these areas. And as we move the needle 2001 to 2020, we introduced much more information about the Part 11, who can approve, who cannot approve, who has the control to approve, and those kind of things were introduced. And we also introduced GAMPs 4 and 5 at this particular point. And as 2020 started coming in, we were supposed to have released the computer system assurance protocol, which is the next stage of how we are emerging into today's digital revolution and stuff like that. But unfortunately, COVID slowed it down, and the draft version has not been approved and yet released. But the draft version is still out already. So these are things that are coming very soon to a PC near you, where you are developing software, but we need to keep this thought process in mind as we move forward. Okay, one thing that you would continue seeing in this whole timeline is that we are increasingly becoming risk conscious. Risk is no longer like, a risk manager will come and take care of this, some project manager, product manager will have to focus attention on that. Risk is about, if you see it, you say it. If anybody can see it, anybody can feel it, you are supposed to be actually acting on it. And that's the whole idea behind risk at this particular snapshot in time. So you will see that, more and more attention is on risk management at this point. So what are some of those GAP principles, processes? So preclinical trials are most likely focusing on information like pharmacokinetics, metabolism, is it targeting the right organs? Is it, properly getting created and things of that nature, or other subsidiary organs actually getting more dosage than it is really required and stuff like that. And then the second one is going to be some of the prerequisite for the legal mandate is making sure that, all the organs are still working fine, and some of those what we call primary organs like, heart, lungs, kidneys, and, things of that nature are not getting any adverse impact. That means if they're not able to perform before the drug was given, then you are creating more problems than actually helping. So those are the things that came up, and as a result of that, GLP, which is a good lab practices, coming in, how you make sure that you are bringing this practices coming into how you develop things. So uniformity, consistency, reliability, reproducibility, quality, integrity, and all these things come in. And for those of you that are from the software development mindset, these are all expected to be the non-functional requirement, not necessarily what the user asks you to do, but other things that you have to do to make sure that whatever the user is asking is not going to be impact. These are called the XCTs. And we have a structure for that in our software development lifecycle. Whether we do it or not is a different story, but we do have a structure for that, right? Those are the GLP, good lab practices. And the next one is going to be GMP. We talked about manufacturing in large scale and stuff like that. And from that aspect, are we still adhering to everything that we are doing? Statistical sampling, for instance, quality, stability, safety, sustainability, integrity. And you see here, some of them are consistent with GLP, some of them are not consistent with GLP. But the idea here is that, these are expanded version for scale, right? And I also want to call out, we don't call best practices, we call them good practices. There is a reason, because, if everything is a best practice, then that's the best. There is no more improvement on this. If you want to continuously improve, we can't say they are always best practices. Sometimes people come and ask me, can you give me the best practices? I'll give you the good practices, not necessarily the best practices, because you need to actually develop that to be best for your organization. So these are things to keep in mind when you bring these things together, as GAMP was trying to do. It's like needs a person with both a business acumen as well as detail orientation. So an eye for both, an eye for strategy, and eye for execution. So both are required. Two eyes of the same face. Without the other, you are not going to get the depth of perception that you need. And this is really required and is imperative for us to be able to do what we want to do. Now, why does GAMP matter? In today's world, the proximity of technology to the patient is increasing, right? So if you look at this, many of you are wearing Fitbits or, Apple Watch or some device that actually, is introducing behavioral modification into you. And that may be good, that may not be good. And that may be, introducing some additional variables here as well that you should take into consideration. Again, risks, increasing digital threat. And now when you are having certain devices that are susceptible to security vulnerabilities, then you need to pay attention to this. I've seen some movies where, the pacemaker that is installed is ready to receive some updates through API calls and stuff like that, because you can operate on the patient to say, I have a new version of the pacemaker with additional software updates, so I have to operate you and with a new version. So I have to be able to give the over-the-air updates. And now these things are opening up security vulnerabilities. In the movies that I have seen, you are able to actually hijack that API calls and introduce a heart attack on the patient. Well, it's happening these days, so if you're not able to actually control these kind of the authentication, there is a lot of digital threats as a result of it, which is getting into the human computer interaction, HCI. And now we are looking at integration of innovative technology, right? Many different things are coming in, like the robots that are emotionally sensitive, or you have blood glucose monitor that you can use your mobile app to scan it and see what your current blood sugar level is today, so that you choose to eat your next meal that contains more sugar or less sugar, or whatever it is, and how sustainable these services are in the long run. And these are some things to keep in mind. So GAMP truly matters over here, primarily because we are entering into a phase where we are moving from software in medical devices to software as a medical device. That's a fundamental difference. Previously, we used to actually put a calculator and put information like you have this height, this age, and whatever these things are, your BMI is so much. Great. Now we are actually creating software that is introducing a number of behavioral modifications. I gave you a few examples already. One of the applications that in my previous past work life was converting your iPad into a first responder device, where there were leads that were coming out of the Apple tablets that somebody can actually connect to a patient who is completely unresponsive, and you would be able to get some information about their ECG electrocardiogram, and find some important things like atrial fibrillation, ventricular defibrillation, something like that that could potentially have a life or death scenario in a few minutes. Then it will guide people, the first responder, to take some proactive preventive steps before they even get that patient to the emergency center. So that was software as a medical device. And many of our software that we are all creating is entering that phase. So it's no longer software in medical device. We are also moving into the next stage of software as a medical device. And technological convergence that is happening. It is one of the 6 global mega trends, and that is impacting what now I call as 4S, which is like safety, stability, sustainability, and security. Without all these 4S, you do not have a software in the first place to begin with. And so this is what we are now emerging and looking into in today's world. So when you take into consideration all these things, GAMP is important, and GAMP comes up with 5 important categories. And I talked about this like GAMP 1, GAMP 2, GAMP 3, GAMP 4, and GAMP 5. Now let's take a quick look at this. And these are not necessarily from the GAMP itself, because it's a closed-ended group. And so I don't have access to the actual details on how they have done. So some of these are subjective interpretation from my end. Now, GAMP 1 was primarily focusing on, the operating system. Long time back, we record the version of the operating system that we are using, and that was pretty much it. Now in GAMP 2, we introduce, controllers and, what devices you are using on top of that, and, stuff like that. So, and a simple example is a calculator that you are using on a, specific operating system could be different from the way it is working on something else. Maybe the rounding, maybe the scientific function that is being introduced and stuff like that. So record configuration and calibration as a result of that. And calibration is an ongoing process. In a normal world, we have, test tube, when all these things that we are actually calibrating for, are they staying within the operating rhythm? How are we doing that on our software? How do we know that the calculators that we are having on our as part of our Windows package, or they are working as designed forever? We take it for granted. We cannot take them for granted on certain things. The next one is the configurable packages. Now, GAMP also introduces, if you look at this, the DLP, the GMP and stuff like that, you're not necessarily going to be doing all those things. The shipments come from one person, the raw materials come from another person, and they are assembled by some other person. So there is a lot of suppliers, vendors, coming into the picture, and you are taking that into consideration and say, what are some of those suppliers' policies? What are some of those vendors' guidelines, and how you are actually using these things to create, this bespoke software as part of your work. It could be firmware, it could be software, it could be hardware. The fourth thing is introducing things like, auditing that particular supplier's code. What processes and checks and balances do you have to verify those things to confirm that they are doing what they are doing before you move forward. So those things are, coming into play. And finally, the GAMP 5 is taking into all the commercial off-the-shelf configurable software. Today you have a lot of software that you can actually do some work in some other place and then integrate that piece and, move it into this particular piece and stuff like that with REST APIs, OP API, and, many other things, web services and stuff like that. So what are we trying to do as part of all these softwares that could potentially give you rules and information that you need to verify as part of your life cycle, complete, life cycle of how the projects are moving forward. So what is GAMP focus here? GAMP 5 focus here. When you look at this, it says guide computerized systems to achieve fitness for use. So quality, in my humble opinion, is defined by two variables. One is going to be conformance to requirements. Other one is the fitness for use. And we can go and talk about, Deming came up with this and Juran came up with this and stuff like that. But fitness for use is the software that you are creating or is the product that you are creating ultimately meeting the end user's requirement? That's a fitness for use to meet the regulatory requirements as such. So you need to take into consideration what are some of those regulatory requirements, not just the product requirements, but regulatory requirements, and then build industry good practice. Again, it doesn't say best practice, industry good practice in an efficient and effective manner to bring everything together. Efficient is about management, effective is more about leadership. So how you bring those things together? When you bring these things into play, GAMP introduces this, 5 elements: product and process understanding. Do I have a good understanding of both the product and the process used in developing the product, services, and result? Which moves into the life cycle approach in terms of how I'm upholding quality throughout, and scalable activities as part of your life cycle within that, and science-based quality risk management, looking into that aspects. And many times people come and say, oh, should I go into, quantitative risk analysis, qualitative risk analysis? Start with the basic things, and then you can move on based upon, how complicated your end product is. And leveraging the supplier involvement, making sure that you understand what their suppliers' processes are, and have a means by which you are able to check them. Right? This is where the artifacts should tell the story, not necessarily what you are telling the story as. When you take into look these things, the focus is primarily on patient safety, which I told, thinking from the end user. It's not for what you wanted to develop and deliver. It's about what the end customer wants, value stream mapping as a result. Product quality, including quality by design. We say this, as part of house of quality, we talk about, many different principles of quality. We mention all these things, but now you are having a regulation comes and says, hey, we need to actually start doing these things. Otherwise, we will not accept that your product is, meeting these requirements. And finally, data integrity, transparency to data throughout the whole life cycle from inception. So when I started an idea, how that idea got flushed into requirements, how it was broken into, multiple tasks for completion, test cases for acceptance scenarios, and then, moved into deployment and what code factored in what particular place. And so all the way till the end. Your idea, I should be able to map it to the end. That's called life cycle management, and how that is actually coming into play. So these are things that people are beginning to look. And if you look at some of those impact and influences, I would like, address things. Effective governance for various artifacts. Your artifacts for defect management may be different from change management or risk management. So you need to have governance for every one of those things. And what are your considerations for quality? So when you say I'm writing a test case, what are your considerations for test case? Is it acceptance scenario? Is it regression scenario? Is it scripted? So those kind of thought process. Now you are looking at continuous quality improvement, where you are focusing a lot more into my product and process. What are the improvement opportunities? And this is the reason why I go back and keep telling, like, don't ask for best practices, because then there is no opportunity for improvement. Focus on good practices and let the best become the good. Then you are continuously getting better, right? Then critical to quality. What is your consideration of quality? What are important things for your quality? So the product that you develop, depending upon whether it is a software in medical devices, a software as a medical device, it could change, right? Similarly, improving the GxP process. Here I'm using XP to indicate, the good lab or good manufacturing, good software, good automation, so all these things come into play for scaling for compliancy. Right. Unfortunately, we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous consideration. So you have to start thinking their way. Configurable systems. What are some of the customization that are available here? What kind of documentation exists and knowledge has been, transferred? Managing the supplier relationship. scale, approach to risk management, a scientific approach to risk management, which means, you have some kind of a subjective ranking, like, if I say this is critical, critical means what, right? Life cycle adoption of all these things. So when you take a look at all these things, even though GAMP originally targeted medical, life sciences, healthcare industries, I think some of these principles are applicable to any industry, whether it is manufacturing, or construction, or financial, or anything like that. That's my take on it. Okay? So when you take into account, where does therefore GAMP apply? Wherever these things are, is there an information system? By that definition, pretty much everything that we do has some kind of an information system, component to it. Is there a computerized laboratory equipment, which comes primarily from, healthcare focus? Are there integrated manufacturing things that we have to be shipped in a particular fashion, packaged in a particular fashion to be deployed to a production environment? See, I'm using different choice of words to say, it could be tangible or intangible. Tangible could be a physical device. Intangible could be a software that you deploy to a production environment. And is there an infrastructure, that your IT infrastructure upon which all these things are getting built? So that when somebody is telling like this particular physical thing that I received is poor quality, I'm able to go back and find which shipment it came from, what particular package it came from, and things of that nature. And take wine industry for that matter. People are able to actually sip the wine and say, this is coming from this particular plant in this particular region, in this particular, being able to track that. So where does GAMP apply? In my simple opinion, wherever there is a life cycle, it applies. And what does it focus on? Procedure and policy alignment, focusing on constant reduction of cost of compliance, bringing the fitness for use thinking to all of us, integrating all these things to tell the story that you want to tell, which is focusing on quality, and finally understanding risks to delivery. So these things are all integrated here. So this is my interpretation of GAMP structure here, because I don't have the permission to reproduce anything. So I'm interpreting this and putting this. So GAMP is a framework. Framework meaning it's not going to be prescriptive. It's going to be generalistic. So it is using things like guidelines, good practices, and guardrails. And what are some of these things that come into play? From a guideline perspective, what product management considerations you are having, what kind of systems development, like ITIL, for instance, or COBIT that you can use. Projects and operations, are you using agile approaches or PMBOK approaches, DevOps approaches, scalable approaches, and stuff like that. Risk and quality management principles. You're applying ISO 31000 considerations, depending upon the industry. Similarly, good practices may include, many things that I am mentioning over here: testing and automation, traceability and auditability, laboratory and manufacturing, and process controls across the entire life cycle of the artifacts that you are having. Right? So computer software assurance is moving into the next stage, which is focusing on how do I test now? The traditional testing approaches or validation approaches used to come and say, I tested this, there is no error here. So here is my documentation to prove that. And that's not what we are looking for. We are moved from the traditional validation to say how we are doing modern testing, which means the number and severity of issues that are coming up. What are the number of issues? What are the severity of issues, and how they are detected, where they are detected, and to what requirements, to what test cases. So as a result, you are introducing the concepts of risk-based testing already here, right? And integrated system interfaces, which I mentioned before, like supplier assessment, multiple process controls. And so how you are integrating all these things into the work package, which is where the task, the test cases, and defects and all these things come into play. And internal change control, who does what by when, and who approved it. These are the things that we are looking at. And when you are looking at this, things that are unchanged are verified. Things that are changed are validated. These are the keywords to keep in mind. Repeated evaluation of risk and governance in our practices, reference to detailed procedures as much as they need, because sometimes I may want to be able to know the details. Sometimes I may want to be able to go up to, roll it up at a higher level. So when you're looking at these kind of thought process, how do you plan? How do you track? How do you report? The plan, track, and report is the concept behind lifecycle management and adapting lean thinking to increase the quality of work. We don't want you to create more document just for the sake of creating the document, but as part of doing the work, the documents themselves have to be created. So when I click on the report where I have the requirements, the test cases, the defects, the risks, I click a button, the report is getting generated. Yes, the report could be of this format, that format, and all those things. That's all, minutiae, but, we are talking about that particular thinking here. This is what computer software assurance is actually focusing on. So let's connect all these, things one at a time. Connection to SDLC. When you look at the software development lifecycle, I don't think waterfall exists in my humble opinion. I have talked about this a lot. It's only existing in people's mind. It never existed in theory. But the idea behind that is product knowledge, process knowledge, regulatory knowledge, and company quality. Company quality could be organizational process assets where, governance and system specific activities are coming in. And all these things are part of your, project team or product team that is delivering the work. And how do they do the work? We have this thought process of PD, CA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, which has been, then modified as Plan, Do, Study, Act furthermore. And when you take a look into these things, it moves into the design. How am I designing? What is my fundamental issue? And what rules I'm using to understand that? And how am I analyzing that? And what conclusions I am drawing across these things. And this is what, regulatory things are focusing on, like what claim is this, the dispute here? What is the dispute here? Why is this a dispute? What law or standard we are not applying or violating over here? And what is the evidence that we have to actually do the work? Many times people come and say, oh, I tested this. Show me the evidence. Show me the evidence that you tested this. I don't need, a screenshot for every one of those, past and failed scenarios. But for failed scenarios, I would like to. And for past scenarios, I want to see that you did the work and passed. As a result, I'm able to follow a proper conclusion. This is what, the issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, thought process is, which is analogous to the PDCA, right? So these two things are connected by these two bookends, in my humble opinion. One is going to be risk. You start identifying risk and plan accordingly. And then as market changes, as requirements changes from the customers or from the business or from technical members of the team or process, you change accordingly. The whole process is bookended between risk and change, in my humble opinion. These are all some of my interpretations over here. So when you look at the project management lifecycle itself, an idea is getting started, you are moving into the appropriate project selection, and from there you are evaluating the skills and competencies required. You kick off the project, and as a result, you are doing progressive planning, which is where the Plan, Do, Check, Act come up. And from there you are trying to continuously improve yourself. You monitor what work is actually put in place, because you started out with proper risk management. You do operational excellence, and as you launch it, and you do some monitoring as a result of the post-production work. And this section is what is constantly moving forward as part of your project and product management lifecycle. So how do I bring all these things together? When you look at this, the user requirements get broken into functional specification, design specification, and development. This is our, not necessarily waterfall thought process, but necessarily, how we think through the process, right? And that means you have installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification. And in the in the healthcare life sciences world, we call this the PQ, OQ, and IQ. Right. And I use a terminology called person of interest to keep that thought process in mind. P stands for performance, operational qualification, installation qualification. So you can use that person of interest to, do this. But there is also something called DQ, which is like, your design qualification, which is what you are focusing on, all the good practices that we mentioned about, what are some of the GLP, GMP processes that you need to bring in based upon your work. And as a result of that, you are moving forward. This is the reason privacy is by design, security is by design, these qualities by design. So you are including these things, and then you are moving into IQ verification, OQ verification, and PQ verification. So this validation, as you move through these verification stages is building the confidence level. As you are increasing the confidence level, you are actually understanding, all right, I'm mitigating my risks. So you started with the risk and you ended with, what is the residual risk that you are accepting. So this is how, the computer system assurance is trying to basically make sure that we are using GAMP and CSCA along with our software development lifecycle to bring a concerted focus on risk management here. So what are some of the quality activities that we are recommending we will do? One is unscripted testing. The other one is scripted testing. Now, in unscripted testing, we have different ways of looking into this, depending upon the level of work that you do. So ad hoc testing is undocumented testing. Don't tell the tester what they should test, but let them test whatever they want to test. It could be software. It could be, even those Gemba walks or management by walking around and finding out how people are using these products and services and results and stuff like that. The other one is error guessing, which is basically how much the tester knows certain things could potentially go wrong. And this could come from previous knowledge in the product or in the industry. The next one is exploratory testing, which is like, I want to make sure that I am going around and testing this. The concept came from Chaos Monkey in Netflix, where you are allowing anything to happen at any point in time and see how your system is robustly responding. And that's the exploratory testing thought process, right? And in the scripted testing, you are coming up with more traceability. So for one requirement, I have multiple test cases. These test cases are testing multiple requirements. And so now you are coming up with these things. And now as these things are getting a lot more stable, what are my evaluation for these things to be automated? Or as they are getting automated, when do I actually review them for refinements and stuff like that? That's your robust, thinking. And finally, risk-based testing, you are combining all these things to say, how can I increase the confidence level with both automation and manual elements in the work. So that's the types of activities. And with that, I'm going to quickly bring up SpiraPlan and demonstrate these 4 different things. Can you see my SpiraPlan that I just switched? Can anyone give me a quick? Yes, great. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So what I have done over here is I have created a test template over here. That template is called a GAMP template over here. So if I go inside my GAMP template, for those, I'm driving this very fast. And if anybody needs some additional demo or anything like that, please reach out to us. But I'm going a little bit fast over here. So if you look over here under this one, I have this workflow. So we talked about workflow, right? And now I have created a GAMP workflow. If you look at the GAMP workflow, we are process following certain protocols like, okay, I'm requesting something from here. I'm reviewing this. It goes under review. And from under review, I can reject this, which goes into the rejected state. I have nothing more left in the rejected state, which means it has reached the end state. Whereas when it comes to accept requirement, it goes into the accepted stage. From accept stage, I can return it to the review so that it goes into a cycle and then, assign it to a specific release, which means it's going to the plan, which means I can start developing on it, or I choose to say, well, I can't do this right now because I'm dependent upon something else, or this is more priority and stuff like that. So I remove it from the plan, which means it goes to the accepted. And once it moves into the, start development, it goes to the in progress. I can approve the design, I can start the development, I can finish the development, many things over here. So you see the process of how I'm doing this over here. Now, when I go inside a particular thing, like say, for instance, accept requirement, and when I click on this, we have an option to say, this is an electronic signature requirement. So we are able to come back and say, this is to be approved by a certain person. And you also have an opportunity to say, who can approve this? Is this the author? Is it the owner, or is it somebody with a specific role? So we give you a lot more control based upon whether you are a small organization or a small team, multiple team members in a medium-sized organization or a large organization where role assignment metrics, RACI, and these things come into play over here. So that's this particular piece over here. And then when you go inside the risk itself, I go inside my risk over here, and I can go inside and say, I'm going to come up with properties. So this is the science-based risk approach, right? So you can start with the qualitative, or you can go too detailed into the quantitative. And here we are focusing more onto the qualitative to say, these are the specific kind of risks that I have, a categorization of the risk. And I can also come back and say, what would be the impact of these things as a result of these things. So when I do these things, I'm able to create a risk heat map from where I can say, this is the most important thing that I need to associate this with. And if I go inside, I created a test GAMP project over here based upon that. When I go inside this particular one to a specific risk here, then I have created like a design secured lightweight API calls in the example that I was talking about in the over-the-air updates to a pacemaker, for instance. If I go inside this particular one, it tells me, this is likely, this is critical. I showed you where they are. This is the information. I can come up with some, potential ideas as to how I can mitigate this. And now I can also come here and say, I associate this with a specific requirement, and the requirements are listed right here. These are my requirements, and this particular requirements, I have associated that with this particular risks. So you are able to see what risks are, how they are working, and stuff like that. As a result of this, I'm able to build that, robustness in my head in terms of how these things are working. Now, one last thing I will demonstrate over here is if I go inside here, I have created this risk requirements exposure report. If I click on this risk exposure report, I'm going to run this in HTML real quick. As it gets delivered here, see, I have two requirements. One of them I have associated with potential risk, the other one I have not. So I'm able to come and say, is this really something that I can do, or I should focus on? What should I not focus on? Why this is not assessed? So these kind of risk-based thinking already applies over here. So as I can demonstrate through these whole interfaces over here, custom properties, customizable workflows, who can do what, electronic signature, and the reporting, the whole concept of how do I plan, how do I track, how do I report, and how do I can constantly improve is all coming through in SpiraPlan very nicely, very beautifully. See, with a few clicks here and there, you are able to get to this. I know I went through very fast on the SpiraPlan, but if you need any information, please reach out to us. With that, I will kind of, go back to the Q&A here. At this point, I want to summarize this. It's GAMP is a framework. It's not going to be prescriptive. It applies to life sciences, but potentially can expand to anything else. The computer software assurance is applicable, therefore, for any industry. It's all centered around risk management. And I demonstrated, these things real quick. With that, I will kind of turn it over to Teresa for any questions.
Thanks so much, Sri. What a fantastic presentation. A lot of helpful information there for folks. A question did come in, and I think that this summary slide kind of helps frame the question a bit. The question is, can we approve a requirement in a single shot, like multiple requirements in a single shot? And is that complying with the GAMP requirements? So maybe you can speak to GAMP requirements versus the framework and how that might work.
Definitely. Thanks, Teresa. That's a very good question. So I believe there were two parts to the question. One was, can we approve these requirements in a single shot? And then if we do that, is it applicable or is it compliant with the GAMP? I believe that was the two parts. I hope I got that right. If not, please correct me. So can we approve these requirements in a single shot? Again, it depends. The most important thing is if the requirement is about company specific processes on quality, on how I'm going to approve multiple requirements, then yes, you can definitely do that. And the tool currently, the way we have structured is going through one at a time. But in the interest of time, I'm not able to demonstrate a multi-approval process that we currently have within SpiraPlan. There is something called Spira apps for SpiraPlan users. They may be able to add on that Spira app and introduce the multi-approval process. So there will be multiple tasks that are getting created so that each and every one of them can individually approve. So that process does exist. But if there is something specific to the Spira app, maybe we can take it separately. If not, it goes back to the company's process requirements. The second one is, does it comply with the GAMP requirement? GAMP is a framework, like I mentioned. It is not going to come and tell you that you can approve all requirements in single shot, or you have to have multiple requirements. Each requirement should be approved individually. It's not going to come and say that, because if it does that, it's no longer a framework. It's very prescriptive, and that's not acceptable. So by GAMP, there is no specific mandate that says individual approval or multiple approvals. It goes back to the specific product, service, or result that you are developing, and to what extent compliancy is really required at the individual granular level or at the multiple requirement level. I hope I answered that question.
That's awesome. Sri, here's another question that talking to risks.
Okay.
The question is, does GAMP allow me to compare different risks?
Yes. I hope when you ask this question, you are asking about different types of risk. So yes, it does allow you to come up with multiple types of risk, and you can associate multiple types of like a business risk, a technical risk, a hazard risk, or a process risk, or an operational risk, and you can create multiple types of those risks. And associate them with test cases or requirements or things like that. So you can do that. GAMP does allow you to compare.
Okay, fantastic. So I see that there was some specific follow-up questions that are specific to Spira and how that works. And I'm conscious of the time, and those are very specific. So thank you for those questions. We'll reach out separately to kind of address those, but thank you so much for asking more about SpiraPlan. So if there's no other questions from the audience, I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, for that excellent presentation. We certainly appreciate your interpretations and really walking us through that entire life cycle, as well as tying it to how SpiraPlan can kind of help meet those needs for both small companies, as you said, as well as large organizations. So really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa.
All right. And with that, everyone have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to providing more sessions like this. So hope to see you again soon. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.